Welcome, everyone, to this episode of ODPi Member Conversations, episode 5 here, where we talk with ODPi members and understand their perspectives on the big data industry and the importance of standards therein. I'm pleased to be joined by two folks from ODPi member Zettaset, John Armstrong, who serves as the Chief Marketing Officer, and Sesh Ramaswami, who is the Director of Product Management. I want to welcome both of you to today's podcast.
Thank you, John.
It's great to be part of the conversation here, and thanks for inviting us to the chat.
Definitely. Well, thank you. And let's dig into it here a little bit and start to look at topic 1 here. So knowing that a lot of the expertise from Zettaset is around big data security, I want to ask a question around big data technologies like Hadoop as they're starting to become more widely deployed in production environments. What are the expectations you're seeing in terms of data governance, operations, and security?
That's a great question, John.
Go ahead, Sesh.
So, as you mentioned, Hadoop is coming into real-time production in many of the enterprises. So the expectation in terms of data governance, it's more important. Like the data is distributed in Hadoop environment. And Hadoop also has projects, multiple applications like MapReduce, Hive, HBase, and things like that. And then added to that, you have on-prem, virtual machine, and then moving into private and public cloud like AWS, EC2 and S3. So data gets moved from a physical machine to a virtual machine to a cloud environment. So the enterprise customers would like to have a hold on the data that the person who there should be a policy to make sure this particular data set is owned and accessed by certain and make sure that the data is intact when it gets used and updated and moved around, either to processing or data or retiring the data. So one should have a single plane of glass, looking at how the Hadoop environment is deployed, plus the way that data is rolled out and from different sources, from SQL database or Oracle database and things like that into Hadoop. It is not structured data, unstructured data, all that. So there's different data types available, and then you have this user control, and you want to maintain data integrity. The data is when the data gets used, it is in the right hands, and then you have mechanisms to work with regulatory, so that you are, in case of a breach or a threat, you have a forensic of who has accessed the data, what has been done to the data, and things like that. So the access control, data ownership, and then data confidentiality in terms of when the data is residing in each environment, in this distributed environment. So John, you want to add to this?
Right. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. You have something to add there, John? Oh, maybe not. I thought you had something to add in there. No, I mean, I think that's really interesting, and the points you're raising around that confidentiality. The pattern that we see with Hadoop deployments is in the early phases, the worries and concerns are more around presentation and sort of the logistics of how the application and its dependencies are constructed. And then really security and governance is something that's really not thought of until the end. And it's often driven by IT requirements of saying, hey, we can't let you have access to all this data. You need to have a thoughtful pattern and presentation of how data is filtered, data is managed, and it needs to fit right within the regulatory requirements we're seeing there. So it's definitely a huge concern, but I think, and I'd be curious on your take on this, it seems like it's often considered way too late in the process, and really this needs to be something that's thought of, really early on.
Yeah, well, that's really, John. It's really a function of the I think the kind of the evolution of Hadoop, as well as the adoption process. So most of the early prospects that we worked with were just using Hadoop primarily in evaluation mode. They had very small clusters, maybe just a handful of servers, and they were basically experimenting on a very small scale. It was all pre-production, and so you're right, security really wasn't a major concern because they were in isolation away from the production network, and it wasn't an issue. But you're right, when they finally want to move into production, and you want to take those data environments and put them into the mainstream, that's when the CSO definitely steps up and says, hey, we need to have some real security in place here before you plug into the rest of the network, because Hadoop coexists in large enterprise environments in conjunction with relational database environments, maybe other NoSQL. So it's not alone, and it has to play well with others.
No, that's extremely true, and it's a great segue into topic 2. As we begin to talk about what data is certainly not restricted in this sense to the cluster, but it's all over the organization and stretched across the cloud and multiple sites there. So I'd love your thought here. With enterprises and cloud service providers recognizing that big data, it requires a comprehensive and coordinated approach to security. Has this eliminated the need for additional protection?
Beyond what exists in Hadoop now for security? Is that the question?
Yeah, I think beyond what exists now in security, and just also what is provided by some of these underlying tools. I mean, they all seem to be doing security a bit on their own. Is that sufficient, or is there another level needed?
Well, I think it depends on how much you're going to interface, you're planning to interface in your environment with existing security infrastructure. So, for example, if you are going to encrypt your Hadoop data, you want to have an encryption solution, an encryption approach that is based on existing key management and hardware security module standards. And there are standards that have existed for quite a while now, since the early 2000s, that are supported by an umbrella organization called OASIS, OASIS, the initials. And they've been providing interoperability standards for key managers. That's the KMIP Interoperability Protocol, or KMIP standard. And then they've also been, they've developed interoperability standards for hardware security modules, where typically keys may also be stored. And that's the public key cryptography standard number 11. And those two standards have been adopted by pretty much all of the mainstream vendors of key management solutions and hardware security module solutions around the globe. And those include major players like Hewlett-Packard Enterprise and Gemalto, SafeNet, Udimaco, IBM. So it's pretty mainstream stuff. To the best of my knowledge, I don't think that those standards are a part of any existing built-in Hadoop security capability. I'll let Sesh elaborate more on that, because he's been working in that environment.
Yeah, so thank you, John. So, security has been there, whether it is Hadoop or traditional database. Hadoop has been there for the last 10, 11 years now, but the security has been there even before that. So suddenly, because Hadoop is coming into the enterprise should not be looking at security as a new thing. So Hadoop needs to fit into the existing security, infrastructure of the enterprise. Having said that, if the current solutions that are available within the Hadoop community, maybe per se, HDFS, MapReduce, some role-based access control, and some logging here and there, but is it comprehensive in terms of access control as well as the data confidentiality between data residing in the Hadoop clusters, and then when it gets moved around inside the nodes, inside the cluster, and when it moves outside the cluster as well, depending on what applications are being used. Like, there are a lot of analytics application coming in data. So with all this said, the existing security model, can it go, solve the problem for the CSO that John was talking about when it is going, production? Is it ready for compliance in terms of any standards like HIPAA or SOX or PCI? So that is where players like, Zettaset and other security vendors come into picture to make sure data confidentiality, in terms of encryption. Encryption is very easy to say, but the key management that John was talking about with KIP and the PKCS 11 standards, that needs to be incorporated, because if you keep on coming with proprietary key management, it is going to be a headache for administrator as well as a security administrator to make the enterprise run the production environment of Hadoop. So those are all the challenges that when a technology like Hadoop gets evolved over a period of time, and now we are ready to talk, into production with security in place. You rightly pointed out that security becomes an afterthought after making Hadoop cluster working. Like, some time back, even to make the Kerberos authentication work, it is a very tough thing. You need to have a battalion of highly trained and knowledgeable security administrators to go and install and configure Kerberos. Being progressing to make them automated and things like that, but still we have a long way to go.
Yeah, it's a similar thread I think we've heard from a lot of others in this space. Security is important. Security is, many may consider it even sort of the boring part of this job, but it is so critical to go. It's so critical to get right because of the risks, involved. And if you're, a CSO, a CISO, a CIO, those are the things that is your job over. Security breaches, both internal and external, are huge. And being able, there's one half of just having the tool capability, but I think one of the interesting patterns that has come with seeing a lot of the security challenges in there is just the complexity. It's never really a lack of security, but it's the complexity in how a security plan is put in place and the tools in there. And the more layers that you're sticking in there, the more disjointed pieces, you just open yourself up to areas of risk. And so when I look at a question like this, and I hear what you're saying, I mean, I think it rings completely true. This is, yes, comprehensive and coordinating is important, but understanding how all those pieces fit together and get this into, this doesn't eliminate additional protection. It's not necessarily often maybe even the question. It's more of, how can we ensure that this is sort of like tight? How can we make sure that the pieces we're using are using the best standards of how they interact? And how can we make sure that the right education is happening to help reduce these areas of risk?
Yeah, lots of moving parts, John, and I think what we encountered early on in terms of working with Hadoop customers and in the Hadoop environment was there were a lot of developers involved around open source, and they were experts in data environments, certainly experts in Hadoop, but within database environments in general, data storage, data lakes, but they really didn't have a very strong background in security. So we had to go through a lot of education. We had to help them understand, what was necessary, where should it be placed and why, the value of having a data-centric security approach, and also the value of getting back to those OASIS interoperability standards, the value of having a security solution that will fit into an existing security framework within an enterprise, and that's I think not it's not too much to overstate that, because if you're in the IT environment these days, for years, you've always had to you've always had to do more with less, and you don't want to introduce a new data environment that requires some kind of proprietary security approach. You want to use existing security solutions that will fit in with your framework and your infrastructure, your key management solutions, your hardware security module solutions. And that's an important consideration for anyone introducing a new data environment into the enterprise, and extremely important for Hadoop. And it's going to be even more important as Hadoop gets pushed out into the cloud. That seems to be, reading a lot of pundits on the internet, where it's headed.
Yeah, I think we could do a whole podcast on cloud security as it applies to here, just in and of itself. But there's a lot of interesting considerations that start popping up there. But I want to use sort of your expertise with working in companies big and small as we sort of transition into topic 3 here. So definitely you're working with companies of all sizes and with organizations handling sensitive data. From your experience working with them, what are the challenges that they're facing with Hadoop, and then what do you bring to the table to help them resolve that?
Let me take that first, and then possibly John can add. So, the most of the Hadoop environment that we are talking about, mostly in terms of security, is healthcare and financial verticals. So it is more of making data available to the right person and making sure that the data is reliable and data integrity is maintained. So if you go through the recent breaches that have come out, so taking the data out is one, but modifying the data or corrupting the data is another type of breaches. That is what is happening very recently. So making the data useless, that becomes it's very difficult to handle. Where John was talking about the data encryption and data confidentiality at rest. So solutions like where you can data changes, unintentional data modification, a hacker coming in and changing the ciphertext or the encrypted data and leaving it, and the whole organization doesn't know that the data has changed, and you're going through analytics or whatever application that is using the data without even having to know that the data has been corrupted. So those are all some of the things that companies like want to address and solve the problem, so that the security administrator and the Hadoop administrator of an enterprise can have peaceful sleep, needing to worry whether the data is going to be breached and things like that. The Hadoop itself, deploying Hadoop itself, you can simply deploy an Hadoop cluster, HDFS. Now there are a lot of automation in terms of UI that has come. To have applications messaging the data, processing the data, and then presenting it in different formats so that the enterprise can make a meaning out of it. With those applications coming in, plus security in place, is the tough thing, and that is a challenge that the customers are having.
No, it's John, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
No, I think Sesh has covered that very well.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I mean, I think it's certainly an area, like we talked about earlier. Companies are approaching the security challenges at the end, and there's a degree of it's non-trivial, but then there's also a degree of it that I think you pointed out of just things that you just have to be considering as you're approaching it. And it's great having a vendor with such depth in security here that you're able to go into these organizations and advise them well. So it's fantastic to hear about what you're doing there.
Thank you.
So moving ahead, topic 4, and you know, one of the big challenges that I hear from the ISV community around Hadoop is, you know, there's a number of security solutions, both in the open source and the commercial sense, but the biggest commonality across all of them is they have a tendency to break Hadoop APIs, and we know when that happens, you know, that the natural ramification is these organizations say, to heck with the security, I'm just going to turn off this tool and deal with the consequences. You know, from your perspective, and if you're talking with an ISV, what can they do to avoid this? And then if you look at an organization like ODPi, what can they do to help?
So let me go first, then John can possibly add to that. So that is where John was talking about standards, right? So when you take Hadoop, distribution from either Apache open source or from ODPi, ODPi comes into the picture because there is some amount of interoperability testing that has been done. So when an enterprise or ISV takes that Hadoop distribution, the application on top of it, we are very sure that appropriate, revisions of all the projects that are being bundled into that particular distribution is done, and you have a certification per se that it's going to work. Like, for example, Hadoop this version, Hive this version, HBase this version. There are umpteen number of projects that needs to be integrated together to have a distribution. Once the distribution is made, then the application ISVs come on top of it. This platform is stable enough so that they can build application on top of it. And now, once these two are, sort of integrated, tested, and both the Hadoop distribution plus the application works in tandem, especially security in place. So you need to make sure that adding another application doesn't break anything below, or opening up another security hole because you are bringing another security application. So these are all, fully vetted regression testing plus the interoperability testing between the application, and also be, aware of what the customer use cases this particular application is going to deploy, making sure that, you have the use case very well addressed right from the bottom level up and the overall stack that's going up to the analytics layer. So, standards like what John was impressing on, like, in terms of either security, standards like KMIP or PKCS11, or Hadoop standards like, ODPi, those play really real, certification from an enterprise perspective that gives a confidence level that, okay, this particular solution has been tested by an organization, and these are all standards that so many organizations have been subscribed and tested. And these two, when they put together, they get a certain amount of confidence this is going to work when they go in production.
Well spoken. No, I have nothing to add to that. That's and it's a very, everybody should understand that the APIs and the integration of Hadoop with other applications in a mixed environment creates tremendous number of issues, which Sesh has discussed. And again, having standards, being confident that whatever new application, whether it's a security application or otherwise, that you're bringing into the Hadoop environment has a good fit it's very important to determine that up front, and obviously to do testing and interoperability. We've found that although there is an overall Hadoop standard, we've worked with many different distributions, pretty much every one of them, and they're all slightly different. They all have little quirks, so to speak, that we have to address and work around.
Yes, thus the point of what we're trying to drive here is, maybe we can't 100% address everything with that, but certainly help bring to light, help resolve what we can resolve, help resolve sort of the critical things in there, and really give somebody more of an honest heads up view as they're going into their cluster of knowing, hey, this is what I should expect. This is my base level of expectations, and you're exactly right. That stretches, farther than just what security solutions do to Hadoop APIs. It's really any solution that can come in there and have an adverse effect. And that's something that we from ODPi want to make sure we can get a better handle on and help this community with. So I've been, for those of you who've been tallying at home, I think we've only mentioned the word standards about a dozen times here. So it's a great topic to finish us off, is in topic 5. I mean, standards is a fun one for us, but Zettaset is certainly the leader in the. I mean, this is something that I know both of you passionately believe in. And your work with, you mentioned OASIS earlier. You work with ODPi in the standards driving space. I'm sure you'll probably be reiterating yourself, but let's just hit this question straight on. Why are standards important?
Well, I'll just start out and very briefly just say that everyone at Zettaset comes from an enterprise background and has worked in an ISV environment, and pretty much all of our cryptologists and security experts have come from larger organizations like SafeNet, Comalto, et cetera. So we've been embedded in the enterprise security environment, and we think it's important that those same characteristics are easily transferable into the Hadoop environment. It's really up to Hadoop users to be open to adopting them. They're not, they're not open systems in the sense that it's not freeware, but they're open systems in the sense that they support interoperability, and that's the key thing. And that's quite frankly what IT people are going to be looking at when they evaluate Hadoop solutions from any vendor. They're going to want to make sure that it fits in with what they already have.
And I think that's a great way to think about it. It's less of the need that some people, when you look at standards of just getting somebody to agree on anything, it's more that it reduces the complexity of support. And I think we talked about this a little bit earlier. But also just, closes off areas of risk. If I know that this area is always going to have these things very true for me, if I know that the solution I have, gives me some open-ended areas for interoperability that exists outside of the scope of what my vendor can provide me, that helps shift me from a buying perspective of being less directly dependent on one vendor, but more being able to put together the best solution for my organization that fits the needs that I have. And that's a powerful thing, right? And that gives a lot of flexibility, to those CIOs, those CISOs, those CSOs that are thinking about these things, that are naturally going to be in hybrid heterogeneous environments. Standards are the way to enable that. I mean, otherwise you run into an area, you have a lot of costs of building your own one-off middleware, and that's not something that an organization typically wants to invest in. So we definitely see the value of that, and we're thrilled to see organizations like Zettaset that is also pushing that same sort of approach of looking at a topic so important such as security.
That's right, spot on. And again, if you think about it from an IT perspective, you want the customer to feel comfortable about adopting a new technology. You want to make it as trouble-free as possible. You want to make sure that it fits into the existing infrastructure. You also want to reduce the risk of investing in that technology from the IT perspective. And standards go really a long way to help support that in the mind of the IT buyer.
Definitely. Well, I want to thank Sesh and John. Thank you both. Sesh joins us here from India, so we're literally traversing different parts of the globe here to pull everyone for this podcast. But I appreciate both of your insight, both of your experience, and the unique perspectives you have as security is going to become a forefront. It is already, but it's becoming even more of a forefront topic as we think about data and big data. And it's great to have your voice in the podcast, but also your wisdom and insight in ODPi.
Thank you so much, John. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, John.
Thank you. And for those of you who listen to today's podcast, thank you for taking the time to listen here. If you're listening to this and you're excited about ODPi and security and big data as it relates to security, and if these are challenges that you're seeing from your organization, from a vendor perspective or an end user perspective, we have some different avenues to help you get involved. Definitely check out the ODPi project on GitHub. This is a link to our specifications right now. One of the things that we have going on is a series of special interest groups, and one of them is focusing squarely on data security and governance. So if this is a hot topic for you as an organization, or you're building products around this space, or you're just looking at talking about the challenges that your product has in dealing with the various security solutions with Hadoop, come check that out. And you can find all that information on GitHub, github.com/ODPi. If you're an end user of this technology and you'd love to help bring forward some of the use cases that you are encountering out in the field, join our user advisory board, and you can learn more information of that on our website, odpi.org/ODPi-n-users. And finally, if you see the effort that an organization and the value that an organization like this is bringing to the table to help build standards around big data and help make it so this is a more sustainable long-term technology for companies to more confidently invest in, we encourage you to look at joining ODPi as a member. And you can find more information about that at odpi.org/members. I want to thank everyone for coming today, and we'll see everyone next time on our next member conversation.